So a major twist tonight in the disappearance of Savannah Guthrie's mother, Nancy Guthrie. Now say that federal three so-called kidnapping notes linked to the case, fake.
At 9:50 p.m. on January 31st, 2026, an 84-year-old woman walked through her front door. Her garage closed behind her, and the night went quiet. Her son-in-law had waited until she was safely inside before driving away. By every measure, she was home. 4 hours and 38 minutes later, her doorbell camera went dark. Not because of a power cut, not because of a malfunction. The camera was manually disconnected. 14 minutes after that, at 2:12 a.m., the camera's own motion software detected movement at the front of the house, movement it could not record because the footage had already been overwritten. And at 2:28 a.m., the app connected to her pacemaker, the device keeping her heart in rhythm, lost its signal. Her phone was still inside the house. She was not. When investigators arrived the following afternoon, they found blood on the front porch, blood along the pathway outside, and blood inside the residence. DNA confirmed it was hers. There were signs of forced entry, and Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, limited mobility, no shoes, no medication, taken in her pajamas in the middle of the night, was gone. No witness heard anything, no neighbor saw anything, and the person who came for her had known exactly how to make sure of that. Before we go any further, this case contains details that are genuinely disturbing. It involves the abduction of an elderly woman, ransom demands sent to tabloids, forensic decisions that investigators themselves now describe as potentially fatal mistakes, and a second note that law enforcement buried for 4 months because they did not want the public to know what it said. We cover everything here at Verdicts Journal with accuracy and responsibility, but we do not look away. If this is your first time here, welcome. Verdicts Journal exists for exactly this, the cases that generate headlines for weeks and answers for nobody. We go further than the news cycle, we stay longer than the press conferences, and we do not stop when the story gets complicated. Hit subscribe right now so you do not miss a single development on this case, and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from tonight. We read all of them. Now, let us talk about what actually happened, because the full picture is more complex and more troubling than anything you have seen covered so far. January 31st, 2026 was a Saturday, and by every account that exists, it was an ordinary one. At 5:32 that evening, Nancy Guthrie left her home in the Catalina foothills and took an Uber to her daughter Annie's house for dinner. She spent the evening the way she often did with family, eating, talking, playing games. Nothing about that night, according to everyone present, stood out. No argument, no tension, no indication that anything was wrong. Just an 84-year-old woman spending a Saturday evening with her daughter and son-in-law before heading home. The son-in-law was Tommaso Cioni, Italian national, musician by profession. He had no permanent residency in the United States. His entire connection to Tucson ran through his marriage to Annie. That evening, Tomaso was the one who drove Nancy home. That detail matters because of what it made him, the last known person to see Nancy Guthrie alive. At 9:48 p.m., the garage door at Nancy's home opened. At 9:50 p.m., it closed. Sheriff Chris Nanos of the Pima County Sheriff's Department later confirmed that 2-minute window as the moment investigators use to establish that Nancy was inside and almost certainly heading to bed. Tomaso did not leave until she was in. He waited, then he drove away. That was the last confirmed moment. The next morning, Nancy did not appear for a virtual church service she was scheduled to watch with a friend. A member of her church noticed the absence and reached out to the family. Family members went to Nancy's home around 11 a.m. and searched the property. No sign of her. At 12:03 p.m., someone called 911. Investigators arrived 12 minutes later and immediately deployed drones and search dogs. Here is what that timeline means in practical terms. Nancy's pacemaker had disconnected at 2:28 a.m. That's the last biological data point investigators have inside her body. The 911 call came at noon. That's a gap of more than 9 hours between the last sign of life and the first call for help. 9 hours. In a kidnapping case, that's not just time lost, that's distance gained by whoever took her. Nancy's home had a Google Nest doorbell camera. What it did not have was an active cloud subscription. Without one, footage was not being saved. It was being recorded locally and then automatically overwritten in a continuous loop. When investigators arrived and realized this, the camera looked like a dead end. And whoever stood at that front door in the early hours of February 1st almost certainly knew that going in. They were wrong to assume it was gone forever. The FBI worked directly with Google and recovered footage from residual data stored in the camera's back-end systems, material that had been considered lost, corrupted, or inaccessible. FBI Director Kash Patel confirmed the recovery publicly. On February 10th, 9 days after Nancy disappeared, that footage was released. What it showed changed the entire character of this investigation. An armed individual, mask covering the face, gloves on both hands, long sleeves, carrying a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack backpack. The person approaches the front door and uses a gloved hand to cover the camera lens, then pulls nearby plants in front of the lens to further block the view. In one clip, while moving through the front archway, the individual deliberately tilts his head downward, a calculated move to keep his face angled away from any possible angle of capture. This was not someone acting on impulse. Every movement was deliberate. On February 12th, investigators released a physical profile based on the footage. Male, 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, average build, black mustache, carrying a unique gun holster, possibly wearing a ring. Each of those details became an active investigative thread. Then came the detail that reframed everything. The FBI had released 2 separate sets of images, one showing the suspect with the backpack and holster, one without. CNN confirmed those images were taken on different days. Investigators concluded the suspect had visited Nancy Guthrie's home on more than one occasion before the night she was taken. This was not a random act. This was surveillance. Someone had studied her home, her camera, her routine, and then came back when they were ready. The backpack became one of the most significant physical leads in the case. The Ozark Trail 25-liter hiker pack is sold exclusively at Walmart. Sheriff Nanos publicly called it one of the most promising leads available. Investigators pulled purchase records from Walmart covering recent months of Ozark Trail hiker sales and reviewed surveillance footage from local Walmart locations. The mask worn by the suspect also appeared to match a style sold at Walmart. The Nest camera's infrared technology had made the black mask appear lighter than its actual color in the footage. 2 separate Walmart product leads being pursued simultaneously. Investigators also worked to identify the specific gun and holster visible in the footage as separate identification threads. The same day the footage dropped, February 10th, a person of interest named Carlos Palazuelos was detained during a traffic stop in Rio Rico, Arizona, approximately 60 miles south of Tucson. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and FBI executed a search warrant on a nearby property and vehicle. By February 11th, the search had concluded. Palazuelos was released without charges. Sheriff Nanos confirmed he was not connected to the disappearance. On February 13th, a separate operation began at a residence 2 miles from Nancy's home. 2 individuals were removed for questioning. Roads in the surrounding area were closed to the public for approximately 4 hours. Both individuals were released. No charges filed. Investigators also deployed a Bluetooth signal detection device aboard an aircraft, circling the search area in an attempt to pick up transmissions from Nancy's pacemaker, which typically broadcasts a signal detectable up to 218 yards away. Search crews and helicopters joined the effort. No confirmed signal was detected. On February 4th, President Donald Trump called Savannah Guthrie directly after she appeared in an NBC interview conducted by correspondent Tom Lamas. Trump stated publicly that he was directing all federal law enforcement to be at the family's and local law enforcement's complete disposal immediately. The White House posted about the case on its official social media accounts and urged anyone with information to come forward to authorities. Every lead was being chased, every thread was being pulled. And yet the person on that footage, the one who had visited Nancy's home more than once, who knew where the camera was, who knew how to cover it, remained completely unidentified. While investigators were processing the crime scene and chasing forensic leads, something else was happening. Notes were arriving. And not to the family, to the media. On February 2nd, KOLD-TV, the CBS affiliate in Tucson, received the first letter. It demanded payment for Nancy Guthrie's release. The Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed awareness of the note and said all materials were being forwarded directly to detectives coordinating with the FBI. The following day, February 3rd, TMZ received an email. This one was different in its specificity. It demanded $4 million in Bitcoin. It described Nancy as safe but scared. It included accurate details about what she was wearing the night she was taken, details that had not been made public at that point, details that only someone present that night would know. It ended with 2 words, or else. A deadline was attached. Both the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI publicly acknowledged awareness of the notes. Then on February 8th, reporting surfaced that a separate demand had placed the figure at $6 million, with a deadline of 5 p.m. on February 9th. 2 separate figures, 2 separate notes. Both deadlines came and went without any exchange taking place. One of those notes also referenced an Apple Watch and a floodlight inside Nancy's home. FBI Special Agent in Charge Chad Jainty confirmed at a press briefing that the note provided no way for the family to make contact with the sender. No proof of life was offered. No communication channel was established. After the deadlines passed, nothing came back. What did surface on February 5th was an arrest, but not the one anyone was hoping for. Derek Colella, 42 years old, of Hawthorne, California, was taken into federal custody. Colella had been watching television coverage of the case and decided to insert himself into it. Using a VoIP phone number, a service that assigns a separate number to a mobile device, he texted 2 members of the Guthrie family directly. Court documents identify the recipients as Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni. His message read, "Did you get the Bitcoin? We are waiting on our end for the transaction." 3 minutes later, he called one of them. The call lasted 9 seconds. When investigators traced the number back to him and confronted him, Colella admitted he was trying to see if the family would respond. On February 6th, he appeared before Judge Karen E. Scott at the U.S. District Court in Santa Ana, California. He was released on a $20,000 bond. A federal grand jury later indicted him on 2 counts, transmitting a ransom demand in interstate commerce and using a telecommunications device with intent to abuse, threaten, or harass. A trial date was set for June 23, 2026, in the federal courthouse in Tucson. His case has nothing to do with the credible notes. It represents the only active court proceedings publicly connected to this investigation. On February 7th, Savannah, Annie, and Cameron Guthrie released a video together. Savannah looked directly into the camera and said the family had received a message and they understood it. She did not describe what the message said. At the time, most people assumed she meant one of the ransom notes already in the news. What that message actually contained and why the family chose those specific words, the family announced a $1 million reward for information on February 24th. The FBI had already posted a $50,000 reward of its own earlier in the investigation. Combined with other contributions, the total reward available for information in this case would eventually exceed $1.2 million, and still, nothing came back that broke it open. When the first credible ransom email arrived demanding $4 million in Bitcoin, investigators faced a decision that would define everything that came after it. Inside the Joint Task Force, a unit made up of FBI agents and Pima County homicide detectives, a debate broke out. One faction argued the family should be allowed to pay the full $4 million. Their reasoning was built on how cryptocurrency actually works. Bitcoin transactions are permanent and traceable on the blockchain. With $4 million moving through a wallet, the kidnappers would eventually have to do something with it. Transfer it, convert it, cash it out. Any movement would create a digital trail that FBI cryptocurrency specialists could follow directly back to them. Pay the full amount, trace the money, identify the suspect. The task force chose a different approach. They deposited $152 in Bitcoin into the wallet address provided in the ransom email. Internally, this was called tickling the wire, a test deposit designed to prompt a response from the kidnappers and potentially draw them into further communication. The thinking was that even a small deposit might provoke a reaction that revealed something useful. The wallet was never touched. No response came. The kidnappers went silent. Investigative journalist Howard Blum, writing for Airmail, reported that some members of the task force now regard that $152 decision as the single most significant investigative mistake in the entire case. His sources described investigators referring to it internally as the Big Jake theory, a reference to a 1971 film in which a kidnapping victim's grandfather refuses to allow the abductors to profit from the crime. The parallel, according to those sources, was not considered flattering. Blum's reporting also revealed how the task force categorized the flood of incoming communications. The good, the credible early emails sent to Cold TV and TMZ that contained accurate details about what Nancy was wearing the night she was taken, details that had not been made public, details that convinced investigators they were dealing with genuine contact from whoever had taken her. The bad, a second email that arrived on February 6th from the same IP routing as the first credible ransom demand, but after the ransom deadline had already passed. The ugly, a later wave of messages from apparent con artists, reward seekers, and people claiming Nancy had been spotted alive in Mexico, none of which produced any credible leads. That second email, the one categorized as the bad, is the note that changes the weight of this entire case. According to sources close to the investigation, reported by ABC News, NBC News, and Airmail, that February 6th note claimed that Nancy Guthrie had died shortly after being taken. It described her as having been buried in nature. A person close to the case told sources the note appeared to include some form of acknowledgement of what had gone wrong, though investigators cautioned against drawing firm conclusions about its precise wording. What law enforcement confirmed is this: the note came from the same electronic source as the first credible ransom demand. CNN Chief Law Enforcement and Intelligence Analyst John Miller appeared on AC 360 and explained that two notes from the same origin, but with dramatically different tones, represented one of the most significant developments in the investigation. Law enforcement made a decision. They asked every outlet that had received this note to hold it entirely. CNN held it. Cold TV held it. The contents were kept from the public to preserve investigative integrity, specifically to keep the channel open in case further communication arrived from the same source. That note was received on February 6, 2026. It was not revealed publicly until June 22, 2026. 4 months of silence. Now go back to February 7th, the day after that note arrived, when Savannah Guthrie stood in front of a camera with Annie and Cameron and said, "We received your message and we understand." At the time, no one watching knew what message she meant. Now you do. Harvey Levin of TMZ later issued a public video statement clarifying that TMZ had not received a note containing an apology, directly correcting misinformation spreading across platforms at the time. TMZ did approach the FBI about paying the Bitcoin ransom themselves as part of a potential documentary. The FBI described the emails as interesting and did not follow up. No payment was ever made. Savannah and the family separately offered money, not for Nancy's return at that point, but to recover her remains, hoping to give whoever was responsible a reason to come forward with her location. No credible response came. No further communication arrived from the source that had sent those first two notes. The wallet still sits dormant. $152 of Bitcoin deposited into an address belonging to whoever took Nancy Guthrie, untouched and unresponsive from the moment it arrived. While the ransom notes were being analyzed and the Bitcoin wallet sat untouched, a different problem was developing inside the investigation itself, and this one did not involve the kidnappers. FBI Director Kash Patel went on Sean Hannity's podcast and made a statement that stopped the national conversation about this case cold. His exact words were direct and unambiguous. "For 4 days," he said, "we were kept out of the investigation." The director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, speaking publicly, confirmed that the most forensically capable agency in the country had been excluded from an active kidnapping case during its most critical window. Sheriff Chris Nanos responded through a Pima County Sheriff's Department social media post. His department's position was that an FBI task force member had been present at the scene from the very first night, and that the Bureau had never been blocked. 2 accounts. One of them had to be more accurate than the other. That contradiction became its own national story, reported independently by both Fox News and Reuters. The conflict did not stop there. It got worse. During the search of the area surrounding Nancy's home, investigators recovered a glove approximately 2 miles away that appeared to visually match the gloves worn by the masked suspect in the doorbell footage. The FBI formally requested that the glove and its DNA samples be sent to Quantico, the Bureau's National Forensic Laboratory in Virginia, one of the most advanced DNA processing facilities in the world. Kash Patel had a fixed-wing aircraft standing by, ready to transport the evidence immediately. Nanos said no. He directed the glove and the DNA samples to a private laboratory in Florida instead. His stated reason was maintaining consistency, keeping all DNA profiles connected to the case in a single facility. Federal sources speaking to Reuters described that decision as blocking access to critical evidence. The Florida laboratory ran into problems almost immediately. The samples contained mixed DNA, genetic material from multiple contributors that proved extremely difficult to isolate and analyze individually. What might have taken days at Quantico took approximately 11 weeks at the private facility. When the results finally came back, the DNA on that glove was traced to a worker at a local restaurant. Sheriff Nanos confirmed that individual had no connection to the case. Separately, DNA recovered from inside Nancy's home at a specific location investigators have not publicly disclosed produced only a partial profile. That partial profile was insufficient to run against CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database containing profiles from over 19 million known offenders. No match was possible. The Pima County Sheriff's Department subsequently announced they were pursuing investigative genealogy, a forensic method that compares crime scene DNA against publicly available genealogy databases to find ancestral connections rather than direct matches. This is the same technique that identified Joseph DeLangelo as the Golden State Killer after more than 40 years, and that led investigators to Brian Kohberger in the 2022 University of Idaho murders. The 3 largest consumer DNA databases, Ancestry, 23andMe, and similar platforms, have barred law enforcement from using their databases for these purposes. Investigators are working with publicly available databases only. Earlier in the investigation, the FBI had also reportedly offered to access doorbell footage through Google during the first critical days. That offer was declined. The footage was recovered weeks later through the FBI-Google collaboration that produced the masked suspect images released on February 10th. The official multi-agency investigation included the FBI, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and multiple search and rescue teams. On the ground in Tucson, News Nation investigative journalist Brian Enton spent more than 33 consecutive days covering the case. His sustained field reporting consistently documented the gap between what was being said publicly at press conferences and what was developing below the surface of the investigation. Beyond the official agencies, community volunteers organized their own search operations. Groups of 12 to 15 people combed roadsides and drainage areas near Nancy's home, looking for anything that could help. During one of those volunteer searches, participants recovered an additional black glove and a Swiss gear backpack. Neither matched the suspect's description. Investigators collected and cataloged everything they found. Retired Modesto Police Department Detective John Bueller appeared on Brian Enton's News Nation program to offer his professional assessment of the case. Based on the blood evidence at the scene and the complete absence of any credible proof of life from whoever sent those notes, Bueller said he struggled to maintain hope that Nancy had survived her abduction. He was not speculating, he was reading the evidence the way he had been trained to read it across an entire career in law enforcement. The investigation was active, the agencies were present, the volunteers were searching, and the sheriff leading it all was about to face questions that had nothing to do with Nancy Guthrie and everything to do with who he had been long before she disappeared. By May 2026, 100 days had passed since Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home. No arrest, no identified suspect, no remains, and the man leading the investigation was now fighting for his own position. 2 members of the Pima County Board of Supervisors announced they were moving to vacate Sheriff Chris Nanos from office. Dr. Matt Hines, the board's Democrat, and Steve Christie, its only Republican, both stepped forward. What made this unusual was the basis for their action. They were not moving against Nanos because of how he had handled the Guthrie investigation. They were moving against him because of something that surfaced in a separate civil lawsuit, a deposition in which Nanos had been asked a straightforward question under oath. Had he ever been suspended as a law enforcement officer? He said no.
The Arizona Republic obtained records from the El Paso Police Department in Texas, where Nanos had worked during the 1970s and 80s before joining the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Those records told a different story. They documented multiple suspensions. The alleged infractions included unnecessary use of force and tardiness. The records indicated that Nanos had ultimately resigned from the El Paso Police Department in lieu of termination. Dr. Hines was direct about what he believed those records showed. He stated that Nanos had lied under oath about his separation from El Paso, and he announced the board was considering the matter to the Arizona Attorney General for a perjury prosecution. He went further than that. He called Nanos a public safety threat and described the board's action as accountability for someone who had evaded accountability for decades. Nanos' attorney responded in writing. The letter argued that Nanos had not understood the deposition question as it applied to discipline at an agency not governed by the Arizona Peace Officers' Bill of Rights, and that Nanos had identified the misunderstanding himself after reviewing the transcript and immediately notified his attorney. Supervisor Jen Allen was less certain about the path forward, describing removal as a stretch and noting there was no clear precedent for the process. The board ultimately voted not to remove Nanos directly. Instead, they referred the perjury allegations to the Arizona Attorney General for review. A conviction on those charges would force his removal from office. That referral remains outstanding. Hines also called publicly for the FBI to be handed full control of the Nancy Guthrie investigation. That transfer has not happened. Nanos remains in office and remains the lead on the case. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffendorfer appeared on News Nation Prime and raised the question many people were already asking, whether the Guthrie family had more confidence in the FBI than in the sheriff who was supposed to be finding their mother. When 13 News reporter Renee Romo sat down with Nanos at the 100-day mark and asked him where things stood, he said his department was getting closer. He said DNA labs were working with investigators every single day, generating new ideas about how to make the evidence work. He believed an arrest would come. 100 days in, a perjury referral pending, and the sheriff in charge of finding Nancy Guthrie was fighting on 2 fronts simultaneously. Every major investigation produces a set of names that the public latches onto, not because law enforcement has pointed at them, but because the facts of the case place them in a position that invites scrutiny. In the Nancy Guthrie case, 2 of those names were already in this story from the very beginning. Tommaso Cioni is an Italian national, a musician by profession. He holds no permanent residency in the United States. His entire connection to Tucson, to this neighborhood, to this case, runs through one thing: his marriage to Annie Guthrie. He was the person who drove Nancy home the last night anyone saw her. He was the last confirmed person to see her alive. That is not an accusation, it is a fact, and in any investigation, the last known contact is where the timeline begins. When Annie and Tomaso went to check on Nancy the following morning, it was the two of them who found the back door open. They were standing at what would become the entry point of the crime scene before any investigator had set foot on the property. Again, that is not an accusation. It is what happened. Public conversation around the two of them was further fueled by reports, unconfirmed by any law enforcement source, that Annie had approached Nancy in the months before her disappearance for a financial loan that Nancy declined. This has never been verified by investigators and is presented here only because it became a persistent part of the public discussion around the case. It is not established fact. A power of attorney document also surfaced online during the investigation. The document showed Tomaso granting Annie durable financial authority over his affairs. It was dated 9 months before Nancy disappeared. Between a husband and wife, that is an entirely routine legal arrangement. Inside a kidnapping investigation, it generated questions that did not go away quietly. On February 26, 2026, Sheriff Chris Nanos publicly cleared all members of the Guthrie family as suspects. On February 25th, the Pima County Sheriff's Department issued an official clearance specifically for both Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni, stating neither was involved in Nancy's disappearance. No official source has re-implicated either of them since that date.
What reporting did confirm, however, was that the vehicle belonging to Annie and Tomaso remained under active review by investigators even after their personal clearance was issued. The people were cleared, the car was not. That asymmetry fed continued public discussion that the official statement alone could not fully settle. Savannah Guthrie sat down with her former Today co-host Hoda Cobb for her first televised interview after her mother's disappearance. She confirmed what investigators had not said publicly in those terms, that Nancy had been taken in her pajamas, without her shoes, without her medication. When Cobb pressed her on what the family knew, Savannah's answer was 4 words: "Honestly, we do not know anything." Cameron Guthrie stood alongside his sisters in every public appeal throughout the investigation, present, consistent, and equally without answers. The questions around Annie and Tomaso have not been officially reopened, but in a case with no arrest, no named suspect, and no confirmed location for Nancy Guthrie, the public conversation has never fully closed either. 2026. Nearly 5 months since Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home in the Catalina foothills. Here is what the public evidence picture looks like right now. 1 strand of hair, a glove with DNA that traced back to a restaurant worker with no connection to the case, doorbell footage of an armed, masked figure who visited the property on more than 1 occasion and has not been identified, a pacemaker that stopped transmitting at 2:28 in the morning, and partial unknown DNA recovered from inside the home that has not matched a single profile in any database investigators have been able to access. No suspects have been officially named, no one has been charged, no remains have been found. In June 2026, a tip came in through Mexican volunteer search group Buscando Corazones Nogales. The tip claimed Nancy was deceased and buried near Nogales along the U.S.-Mexico border. Investigators assessed the tip, and a search was conducted on the Mexican side of the border. It returned nothing. The neighborhood around Nancy's home has become something else entirely in the months since she disappeared. True crime content creators began arriving in the Catalina foothills and live streaming from outside the property, generating repeated complaints from residents. On June 11, 2026, Alexander Zabel Jr., a 54-year-old who runs the YouTube channel Criminal Network, was arrested by Pima County deputies outside Nancy's home. He was live streaming at the time deputies approached him. During the arrest process, a Pima County sergeant was knocked to the ground. Zabel was booked into the Pima County Adult Detention Complex on charges of resisting arrest, a Class 6 felony, and public nuisance, a Class 2 misdemeanor. It was his second arrest in that same neighborhood within the same week. Days earlier, he had been detained alongside another content creator named Troy Bradshaw on charges of obstruction of a highway and public nuisance. The case has drawn an unusual volume of online attention. Communities of self-described mom detectives exchanging tips and theories across social platforms, alongside a physical presence in the neighborhood that law enforcement has had to actively manage. Legal experts weighed in on where the case could go from here.
Criminal defense attorney Michael T. Vanderveen confirmed to Newsweek that prosecutors can pursue a homicide case without a body through circumstantial evidence, and that judges are permitted to instruct juries that circumstantial evidence carries equal or greater weight than direct evidence. Attorney Joshua Schiffer was more cautious, stating that based on what is publicly known, the case would not currently support a prosecution, while acknowledging that much of the investigation remains confidential. Former police officer and criminal investigation professor Daniel K. Maxwell noted that in cases without remains, the evidentiary bar is significantly higher, and that investigators must build an unusually detailed circumstantial picture to satisfy both elements of the crime, that it occurred and who was responsible. The FBI is pursuing new technical approaches. Sources speaking to Fox News Digital confirmed investigators are exploring advanced video forensics, blockchain tracking, and signals analysis. Morgan Wright of the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases stated his belief that the resolution of this case will come through technical means rather than a traditional investigative break.
Brian Enton, who has covered this case longer and closer than almost any other journalist, said his thinking has shifted significantly over 4 months on the ground. The ransom dynamics, he said, never fully added up. No direct contact with the family, no proof of life, no functional way to make a payment. He described the case plainly as still a mystery. The reward for information exceeds $1.2 million. The perjury referral against Sheriff Chris Nanos to the Attorney General remains outstanding. The investigation remains under the jurisdiction of the Pima County Sheriff's Department, and Nancy Guthrie has not been found. When this case breaks, and based on everything now in motion, it will, Verdict's Journal will cover it before anyone else and in more depth than anyone else. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications so you are not the last to know. Nancy Guthrie's story is not finished.